I came home to surprise my family for the holidays. When I walked in, they barely looked up from their phones. No hug, no welcome back. Just, did you bring gifts? I set the bags down, said, actually, I forgot something, and walked right back out, this time for good. Hey Reddit. My name's Jonah, 32M, and I honestly never thought I'd be the type to post something like this. Usually, I just read stories here quietly during my breaks or late at night when I can't sleep. But after everything that happened this past Christmas, I guess it's been sitting on my chest too long to keep it there anymore. Maybe putting it all down will make it feel a little less heavy. Some background first, because I think you kind of need the whole picture to understand why this hurt the way it did. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. One of those places where everybody knows each other, people leave their doors unlocked, and Friday night football games are the center of the social calendar. On the outside, my family looked like a pretty normal one. My mom, Darlene, was a part-time teacher's aide who spent more time organizing church bake sales than actually working, and my dad, Victor, was a mechanic who eventually started his own auto shop. I have one sibling, my younger sister, Bree, 29F, who, as far back as I can remember, was treated like the family's little miracle. Now, I'm not saying that Bree didn't deserve love. She was funny, bubbly, had the kind of smile that made old ladies in grocery stores hand her candy. But there was always this imbalance. If Bree got a B+ on a spelling test, it was a reason to throw a party. If I brought home straight A's, it was expected. If Bree forgot to feed the dog, someone else would pick up the slack. If I forgot, there'd be a long lecture about responsibility. Little things at first. But when you're a kid, you notice. As we got older, it became more obvious. Bree could do no wrong. When she wanted to switch majors 3 times in college, my parents celebrated her bravery and self-discovery. Meanwhile, when I announced I was moving halfway across the country for a job opportunity right after graduating, the mood in the house felt more like a funeral than a send-off. Why would you leave us? My mom had said, tears pooling in her eyes. Family is everything. Funny how that only seemed to apply when it was me making choices they didn't like. Still, I tried to keep ties. I'd call once a week, even when the conversations were one-sided. I'd remember birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Most of the time, I got short responses back, if any. But that little kid in me, the one still hoping for approval, kept trying. Fast forward to this past year. Work had been going well. Better than well, actually. I'd been promoted, got a big holiday bonus, and for once, I didn't have to worry about scraping together enough for plane tickets home. I was feeling good, stable, and maybe a little nostalgic, if I'm honest. Thanksgiving had been quiet. I stayed in my apartment with some friends, but Christmas was always my mom's favorite holiday. The house would be decked out by mid-November. She'd have 3 different Christmas trees in 3 different rooms, each with its own color scheme. Dad would string up so many lights outside it probably doubled the neighborhood's electric bill. And there'd be baking. So much baking. Gingerbread cookies, fudge, those peanut butter balls dipped in chocolate. Growing up, Christmas felt magical, even when the rest of the year didn't. I started to think, maybe this year could be different. I didn't tell them I was coming. I figured, maybe if I showed up unannounced, it would be a real surprise. A happy one. I pictured it 100 times. Me standing in the doorway with an armful of presents, the family rushing over with smiles and hugs, my mom maybe tearing up a little. It was a nice thought. Comforting. So I planned. I bought gifts early, not just random stuff, but things they would actually like. A leather tool belt for Dad that I'd spent way too much time picking out because I remembered his old one had cracked. A monogrammed recipe book for Mom where she could finally write down all her holiday baking secrets. For Bree, a beautiful handmade necklace from a local artist. It had her birthstone in the center. I even picked up some toys for my little cousins. I wanted it to be perfect. The flight was rough. Delays, cranky passengers, the usual holiday chaos. By the time I landed, it was already dark, and snow was starting to fall. I got into a rental car and drove the familiar winding roads back to the neighborhood where I grew up. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The houses, the trees, even the streetlights. When I finally pulled up to my parents' house, my heart was pounding like I was a teenager sneaking in after curfew. The windows glowed warmly against the night. A wreath hung on the front door, twinkling with little white lights. For a second, I let myself hope. I grabbed the bags, 3 in each hand, plus a backpack slung over my shoulder, and made my way up the walkway, boots crunching softly over the dusting of snow. The door was unlocked, like always. I nudged it open with my foot and stepped inside. The familiar scent of cinnamon and pine hit me first. Christmas music was playing low from the kitchen, Bing Crosby, if I wasn't mistaken. I smiled to myself. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the excitement bubbling in my chest. Surprise. There was a pause. A brief flicker where I thought maybe they were about to come running. But instead, nothing. Bree was sprawled out on the couch, scrolling absently through her phone. My dad was in his recliner, tablet balanced on his lap, watching something with his earbuds in. Mom sat at the dining table, her laptop open, typing furiously. None of them even turned their heads. I stood there in the doorway, snow melting off my boots onto the welcome mat, juggling bags that were starting to dig painfully into my fingers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mom glanced up. Her eyes flickered over me, casual, almost bored, and she said, "Oh, Jonah, you're here." No warmth. No excitement. "No, we missed you." Just 3 flat words, like she was acknowledging a package delivery. Before I could even process it, Bree, without looking up, said, "Did you bring presents?" Not, "Hey Jonah, I missed you." Not, "How was your flight?" Not even a hello. Just that. I swallowed hard. Set the bags down by the coat rack with a thud. My chest felt hollow, like all the excitement had drained out through my shoes. Still, I managed to smile, or at least something close to it. "Actually," I said, reaching for my coat again, "I forgot something in the car. I'll be right back." I stepped back out into the cold without waiting for a response, pulling the door closed quietly behind me. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't coming back. I stood on the porch for a long moment, my hand still resting on the door handle like part of me was waiting for someone, anyone, to follow me out. Maybe to call after me, laugh, say it was a joke, that they were happy to see me after all. But the seconds stretched out into minutes, and the only thing I heard was the faint hum of the Christmas music leaking through the door. It was colder now. The kind of cold that seeped into your jacket, into your bones. My breath came out in little white puffs, disappearing into the dark. I turned and walked down the steps, my boots crunching in the snow. The street was silent. Every house around ours was lit up, glowing windows, wreaths, even a couple of inflatable snowmen swaying gently in the breeze. Little pockets of warmth and life. It made the stillness of my parents' house feel even heavier. Hollow. I sat down heavily in the rental car, just staring at the steering wheel. The gifts were still inside, sitting right there in the hallway. I could picture them perfectly. Dad half listening to whatever was on his tablet, Bree still scrolling through her phone, Mom hunched over her laptop, all 3 of them barely acknowledging I existed. I thought about leaving right then. Just driving back to the hotel I'd booked for the week, spending Christmas alone. It wouldn't have been the first time I spent a holiday by myself. But then something twisted inside me. A slow, burning anger that started low in my gut. After everything, after the money spent, the time taken off work, the endless planning, they couldn't even be bothered to stand up. It wasn't just tonight, I realized. It was always. I was the afterthought, the backup plan, the extra, the one they only remembered when they needed something. It was like all the little slights over the years suddenly clicked into focus, like someone had wiped a dirty window clean, and I was seeing it all clearly for the first time. And for once, I wasn't going to swallow it down and pretend it didn't bother me. I wasn't going to be the good son who just smiled and stayed quiet. Not this time. So I sat there a little longer, thinking. Not just thinking, planning. After about 10 minutes, I took out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person I knew would pick up. Someone who understood what it meant to be treated like an afterthought. My cousin Mallory. Mallory, 33F, was technically my second cousin, but growing up, she felt more like a sister than Bree ever did. Mallory's side of the family had never really fit the picture-perfect mold my parents tried to project. Her mom had gone through a messy divorce, worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, didn't have time for PTA meetings or hosting dinner parties. My parents always talked about Mallory's family in hushed tones, like they were a cautionary tale. But Mallory was tough, honest. She didn't sugarcoat things. And she never made me feel invisible. I tapped her number and hit call. She picked up on the third ring. Jonah. Her voice was warm, surprised. Like she was actually happy to hear from me, something I hadn't realized until that moment I was desperate for. Hey Mal, I said, clearing my throat. You busy? Nope. Just wrapping a few presents. What's up? You okay? I almost laughed. Even over the phone, she could tell something was wrong. Yeah, I lied. Then I paused. Actually, not really. I'm in town. I surprised my parents for Christmas. There was a beat of silence on the other end, like she already knew the ending before I even said it. And let me guess, she said, her voice gentler now. It didn't exactly go like a Hallmark movie. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat. Not even close. We talked for a while after that. I told her everything, the cold welcome, the way they barely looked at me, how Bree's first words to me were asking about gifts. Mallory listened quietly, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief, but mostly just letting me get it out. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you know, you don't have to keep knocking on a door that's never going to open, right? That hit harder than I expected. I sat there in the car, Mallory's words hanging heavy between us, and something shifted. She was right. I had spent years, decades, chasing a version of my family that didn't exist, hoping that if I just tried harder, did more, became more, they would finally see me. But the truth was, they saw me just fine. They just didn't care. And sitting there, I realized something else. I didn't owe them anything. Not my time. Not my presence. And definitely not my gifts. Hey, Mallory said after a minute, her tone shifting, a little lighter now. Why don't you come over here? We're doing a big Christmas Eve dinner. It's mostly chaos, kids running everywhere, my dog probably stealing food off the counters, but it's real. It's family. You're always welcome. For the first time all night, my chest didn't feel so tight. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I like that. But before I could drive away, there was still one thing I had to do. I hung up the phone, pocketed it, and stared back at the house one more time. The porch light was still on, the door still slightly ajar from where I hadn't closed it properly. Inside, through the window, I could see my parents and Bree, just as I had left them. Bree now had her feet kicked up on the coffee table, lazily flipping through TikToks. Dad was snoring lightly, his tablet slipping onto his chest. Mom was laughing at something on her screen, not even glancing toward the door. None of them had noticed I was gone. None of them cared. And that made what I was about to do even easier. I sat there a minute longer, letting the cold air inside the car wake me up fully. No more hesitation. No second guessing. If they didn't care that I showed up, then they certainly didn't deserve what I brought with me. The bags I carried in weren't just any gifts. They were thoughtful, personal. I had spent weeks picking them out. For Dad, a limited edition set of vintage vinyl records from one of his favorite bands, ones he'd mentioned in passing last time we talked, the kind of thing he'd never spend money on himself. For Mom, a silk scarf from a boutique downtown that matched the exact shade of blue she loved to wear, the one she said made her feel younger. For Bree, a designer makeup set she had once ranted about not being able to afford, some limited release that sold out almost immediately after it dropped. Each one picked carefully. Each one wrapped neatly in gold paper, tied with real satin ribbons. And I had planned to hand them out, smiling, watching their faces light up. But now they were going to find out exactly what they had thrown away. I got out of the car and walked slowly back up the steps, boots crunching over the same snow I had trudged through earlier. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. It made everything feel even colder somehow. The door was still half open, and I pushed it gently with one gloved hand. Inside, it was like nothing had changed. Bree was now lying flat on the couch, scrolling absently. Dad was half asleep, mouth open, soft snores escaping him. Mom didn't even glance up from her laptop. I cleared my throat once. Nobody looked up. I stepped fully into the house, my footsteps deliberately loud against the wood floor. Still nothing. It was almost impressive, the way they could pretend I was invisible. Fine. I walked over to the hallway, where the bags still sat where I had dropped them. The gold paper gleamed under the lights. I picked up the bags, one by one, handling them carefully. It almost hurt, thinking about how much time, effort, and love had gone into choosing them. But there was no point in leaving them here. They would rip the paper open, glance at the gifts, maybe offer a distracted thanks, and then forget about them by morning. No, I had a better idea. I walked back toward the living room, the bag swinging slightly from my hands. Bree glanced up for half a second, just long enough to notice the movement, and then went right back to her phone. Typical. Standing at the edge of the room, I cleared my throat again. Louder this time. Mom looked up, finally. Her face barely registered any emotion. "Did you forget something?" she asked, her voice distracted, already looking back down at her screen. I smiled tightly. "Yeah, I did." I set the bags down right there in the middle of the living room rug. 3 perfect, glimmering packages. 3 chances. 3 bridges about to burn. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and even, "I forgot something really important." Dad stirred in his chair, blinking himself awake. "Huh? What?" I kept my smile in place. It felt foreign on my face now, brittle, like it might crack. "I forgot that I'm not obligated to spend my holidays with people who don't even pretend to care." Bree froze, phone still in her hand mid-scroll. Mom's head snapped up fully now, eyes narrowing slightly. "Jonah, don't be dramatic." I held up a hand, cutting her off. For the first time in my life, I didn't let her steamroll me. I didn't shrink under the weight of her size or her sharp tone. "No," I said, steady. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest." I knelt down, opening each bag one by one. First Dad's. I pulled out the vinyl records, careful not to damage them. Then Mom's scarf, folded so neatly it looked like a shop display. Then Bree's makeup set, still in its original box, untouched. I laid them out in a row on the rug, like a presentation. 3 perfect gifts. 3 perfect insults. I straightened up slowly, looking each of them in the eye. "You don't get these," I said quietly. Mom's mouth opened like she was about to protest, but I spoke over her. "You don't get the gifts. You don't get me bending over backwards anymore. You don't get to pretend." Bree finally spoke, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a whip. "Seriously? You're throwing a tantrum because we didn't throw you a parade." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar twinge of guilt or shame or the desperate urge to make her like me. All I felt was tired. "No, Bree," I said. "I'm walking away." "There's a difference." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Now hold on," he said, voice gruff. "We're family. You don't just walk away from family." I gave a small, humorless laugh. "Funny. That's exactly what you've done. Over and over again." I just finally noticed. I bent down, gathering the gifts back into the bags. Mom stood up, finally, crossing her arms over her chest. Her voice was cold now. No warmth, no motherly affection. "You're being selfish, Jonah. It's Christmas." I straightened up, the bags in my hands. I met her gaze dead on. "No, I'm being free." And with that, I turned and walked out the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't say anything else. I didn't give them another chance to twist it around. The cold hit me like a wall the second I stepped outside. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. I walked to the car, set the bags carefully in the back seat, and started the engine. The headlights cut across the snow, casting long shadows over the empty driveway. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silent. No one followed. No one called my name. Good. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, turning down the familiar street one last time. The gifts in the back seat rustled slightly as I drove, and I smiled to myself. They weren't going to waste. I drove in silence for a while, the cold of the car matching the chill in my chest. But it wasn't the same as before. The weight was different now, lighter, somehow. Like I'd finally made a decision that mattered, one that wasn't about pleasing anyone else. I didn't rush to Mallory's place. I didn't have to. I had time now. I wasn't desperate to make up for something, to fit into a mold I no longer cared about. I arrived at her house about an hour later. The porch light was on, the warm glow spilling out onto the snow-covered driveway. It was a contrast to the emptiness I'd left behind. Mallory greeted me at the door with a big hug, like she was genuinely happy to see me. There were no awkward questions about why I was late or why I'd shown up alone. It was just easy. She noticed the bags in the back of the car immediately when I brought them inside. "So, I take it the Christmas miracle didn't exactly go as planned?" she asked, a little smile tugging at her lips. I set the bags down carefully in the corner of the living room. "No, it was more like a Christmas disaster." Mallory chuckled, but when she saw the look on my face, her expression softened. "I'm glad you came here. You don't need to deal with that, whatever that is. You deserve better." I nodded, swallowing the knot that had formed in my throat. "It wasn't just tonight, Mal. It's been years. I always thought if I tried hard enough, they'd change. That if I just gave them what they wanted, maybe they'd see me for once." I paused. "But it's never going to happen. They don't care." Mallory patted me on the back, her voice firm. "I know, Jonah. But you've got me, and you've got a lot more than they ever gave you credit for." The dinner that followed wasn't anything fancy. It wasn't about lavish decorations or perfection, but it was real. There was laughter. There was food. There was life. Mallory's kids ran around the house, tripping over their own feet, her dog barking excitedly at the door, wagging its tail in pure joy. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that felt right, not forced. By the time I headed back to the hotel, I felt lighter than I had in years. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to tie up the last loose end. I knew I couldn't walk away from everything without giving my family one last chance to understand what they'd lost. So I did something I thought I'd never do. I sent an email. It was simple, maybe too simple. But sometimes the most direct approach works best. Subject: the gifts you didn't want to Mom, Dad, and Bree. I left your house tonight. I left because I finally realized that all the effort I've put into making our relationship work over the years was never going to be enough. And it wasn't because I didn't try. I gave more than you deserved. The gifts I brought for Dad, the vintage vinyl; for Mom, the silk scarf; for Bree, the makeup set, are not for you anymore. They're for someone who would appreciate them. I'm done pretending. I'm done hoping things will change when they never will. I don't owe you anything. I haven't for a long time. Happy holidays." Jonah. I hit send and stared at the screen for a moment, feeling strangely relieved. Then I closed my laptop and set it aside, like I was shutting a chapter of my life for good. The next morning, I got a call from Bree. Her voice was harsh and defensive. "Why would you send something like that?" she demanded, her tone dripping with anger. "We didn't do anything wrong." I felt the old instinct to explain myself, to backtrack and make it right. But then I remembered how they'd all acted last night, how they'd completely disregarded me. "No, Bree," I said calmly, "you didn't do anything wrong. You just never cared enough to do anything right." There was a long pause, and then she hung up. I didn't feel any regret, not even a little. The next call came from my dad. "Jonah," he said, his voice sharp, but this time with a tinge of desperation. "This isn't the way to handle things. You can't just walk away from your family like that." I could hear the edge of guilt in his voice, but it wasn't enough. Not after all the times he brushed me off. Not after everything he'd done to make me feel like I was invisible. "I don't need to handle things your way anymore, Dad," I replied. "I'm done trying." I hung up before he could say anything more. The following days passed without much change. There were no more calls from my mom, no apologies from anyone. The silence stretched out like a great chasm between us. They'd never understand what they'd lost, and honestly, I was okay with that. What mattered now was what I had gained. I stayed at Mallory's until after the holidays, and when I finally headed back to my own life, it was with a clear mind. I knew I was done with them for good, but more importantly, I knew I didn't need their approval to be happy. I didn't need to chase after their love. And most of all, I knew what true family was. It wasn't about perfect gifts or obligatory gatherings. It was about respect, trust, and people who genuinely cared. When I looked back, I didn't regret the decision I'd made. The silence from my family? It wasn't just their loss. It was my freedom. And that was that. After all the years of trying, after all the waiting for a family that never truly saw me, I finally found peace. I didn't go back. I didn't try again. Because, in the end, they weren't just neglecting me. They were losing me. And they'd never even notice.